For every time a woman is placed into like a new frontier of the military, right? They have to confront all of these barriers within the military culture and probably the military regs and the regulations and rules that adapt to them in their existence just to be there, right? They have to fight for their existence just to be there. And that, I don't think men understand really the toll that takes in fighting for your own existence.
Babes over barriers.
Babes over barriers.
We got this.
Hey, beautiful people. Welcome back to the Babes Over Barriers podcast. It's a safe space to talk frankly and vulnerably about all things women face as barriers. With everything going on this year, there have been some pretty heavy topics that we need to discuss, including sexual harassment and assault in the military. I just wanted to warn you that if you are easily triggered by talking about sexual assault experiences, you may want to skip through parts of this conversation or this episode completely. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Today, I have a special guest, Jeff Wagner. He is a captain. Hello. He's a captain in the U.S. Air Force doing all kinds of cool things related to space, right?
Super cool.
Yeah.
Space.
It is really cool.
It is. Gotta brag.
But outside of that, he's also a sexual assault victim advocate.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Let's start with how are you?
How am I? Yeah. What am I bringing into this today?
Exactly.
Bringing a lot here. Mainly just not graduated, but finished one of my grad school classes, motivational interviewing. It's for...
Are you sad about it?
I am excited. A little sad, actually, that it's ending because it was pretty fun. Trying to get into a social work graduate program eventually. So
he's serious about this.
Yeah.
Helping people.
Yeah, for sure. And, you start from square one. So am I good at it now? Maybe not. But hey, we're building on that. So I'm bringing that excitement from the class. I did yoga this morning for a few hours. Which I think is really cool that a guy is very open about doing yoga. I don't know. I just haven't really talked to many men that are open about doing yoga. So. Yeah. 100%. If we talk about masculinity later, like that'll definitely come up.
Yes,
because yoga is one of those things where it's interesting that the history of yoga, like the history of many things, has been very sexist and like patriarchal. And so women weren't allowed to do yoga like in the beginning, right? It was all men in India. And now when it changed over to the United States, it's like, that's a feminine thing. It's like, I wonder if
that's
maybe
really
there's some sort of cultural masculinity component of that. Like in the United States, we don't want to do that. Foreign is considered effeminate or something. But I'm trying to get my yoga certification, and so this was part of that training process, running through the vinyasa sequence and stuff. So that was cool. I also talked to a good friend of mine. She's a pretty strong feminist as well, and we just kind of had this kind of very open and authentic talk today that was like really meaningful and important just to get stuff off our chest to make sure we're on the same page. Good friend of mine, so that was really cool too. That was about an hour ago, and then just got off the phone with my grandma and my dad.
I love that.
Honestly, I'm pretty in a good headspace right now. How are you doing?
Awesome. I sound really enthusiastic right now, but I actually almost had a panic attack this morning, so that was not too great. I've been on a SSRI or serotonin reuptake inhibitor journey, if you will. I've had a lot of anxiety in the past, which I'll actually do my own episode about like my own experiences later, but
hell yeah.
I got on anxiety medication, have been for a little while, and then got off of it kind of recently for a couple months. And then I consulted with my doctor and am back on it again. And honestly, I forgot how much SSRIs affect my body. So just taking it day by day. But honestly, I'm glad I'm here doing the podcast with you, Jeffrey.
Yes, ma'am. It sounds like a lot, to have to experience and then still bring this full professional force and energy to
I kind of love it though.
A podcast,
I love it because it forces me to be happier, and in turn it makes me happier. And that's
Kaza.
Gotcha. That's Korean for let's go. But today we're actually talking sexual harassment, sexual assault in the military specifically. So one of the reasons we're actually talking about this here is because in the headlines recently, summer of 2020 here, where a soldier named Vanessa Guillen went missing. She went missing in Fort Hood, Texas. She was a 20-year-old woman, last seen in a parking lot of her barracks. Is that how you say it? Barracks? Okay.
Yeah.
I honestly have not very familiar with military terms.
That's actually where Obama was conceived. That's why he's called Barack Obama.
I'm glad we're the start of conspiracy theories here.
This is good.
But her remains were found on June 30th, and later investigators found that she was bludgeoned to death with a hammer and was sexually assaulted before that. And one of the reasons why she ended up that way was because she had confronted someone in the military and was going to go report it to her authorities.
Yeah.
And it was a huge thing, still a big issue in the military. There is the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act that the U.S. House lawmakers introduced into Congress that would make sexual harassment a crime without the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that more prosecution decisions of sexual assault and harassment can be taken out of the military and out of the military chain of command. So, big issue, and you are a sexual assault victim advocate in the military, which is interesting. So let's just start with like why you got into helping people in the sexual harassment. What's your military background, and like how did you get there?
Yeah, for sure. I guess right off the bat though, the whole Vanessa Guillen case is obscene. The amount of violence that women face in general in society. This was kind of like the capstone of violence against women, and it's insane. And just to think about that, people are still like sexual assault and harassment is not taken seriously in spite of such an egregious example, just is really frustrating and kind of reduces my hope for humanity a little bit. Yeah, it's just super saddening. Like every fact that you talked about with this case, the fact that she wanted, and we'll talk about this later with victims coming forward and like the courage that it takes. But she kind of, had this courage. I think she was talking to her family or some close friends about coming forward and was really debating whether or not to put pressure on this and to make it, a case, an investigation. So a lot of weight behind her decision, and then to come forward and, decide to, hopefully bring justice. And then she receives this result. It's just really, really depressing thinking about it. It makes my blood boil, basically. So just want to, respect that and respect that the story with Vanessa. I think how I came into it is more of a slow roll into just wanting to dive deeper into helping others. I'm going in for social work, so becoming an ally and really trying to listen and check my privilege. I do think, I consider myself a feminist. I do think men can be feminists, and I think it's not a dirty word. And this is just part of that. I've done resiliency work and helped people in the unit, in my squadrons, work through mental health resiliency and strength and, coming to be our more authentic and strong, resilient selves. And this is like one of the few extra duties you can do to get certified. So like, that's kind of why I was like, oh, I could really, learn more and lean in and get to advocate and listen and really check my privilege and really just see how things work from that perspective in society. And I've learned so much already.
Yeah. What's the training like?
Well, first, maybe there's a prerequisite of like, don't be, a Chad, like, a Chad, like,
no offense to
frat
Chads
boy that's just like objectifying women. Like, you're not going to have a good time in the training. It's a 40-hour training, just a week long, and you go through. So it's kind of weird in the military too, because you don't have uniforms in the training, which is kind of like a very neutralizing environment that you're in. Because usually it's like you identify a person based on their rank, and you like put them in like some sort of arc.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, some hierarchy in your brain. Yeah. So you have to show up in civilian clothes to make sure it's neutral. There's no power dynamics. Everyone's kind of equal, has an equal voice. I didn't get that memo, so I showed up in my uniform, and I'm a captain, so generally there's less officers in this kind of training. Okay. And less men. So here I am being this like man who was like, the uniform showing up is kind of like this implied, look at me, I'm important. So I'm just like, oh no, that's not a good start.
What demographic makes up the people that do come and train and actually become advocates?
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty equal. At least what we have now, because at Schriever Air Force Base where I work, doing space operations testing, like the military is already diverse. You generally have, it's mostly women in this organization, and it's about equal, in terms of race. Like it's, you have white women, black men, white men. Mainly, I think the majority is like, it's mainly women though. So understandably so. I think a lot of the victim advocates I've seen and those that have been active in their activism or engagement or volunteering with this topic have personally had experiences, of being a victim and being a survivor. And so they want to help others because of that experience. Yeah.
And have you had any particular experiences either to yourself or observed things before?
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of a hard topic. Like I think one I don't really want to share. But one is, it all comes down to, I don't know. Actually, maybe it doesn't. It's actually pretty complicated. Like everybody's story is different, because it doesn't, what I was going to say is it comes down to consent and respect, but really sometimes that's not even in the equation. Like it's just confusion and maybe misinterpretations. And in terms of the harassment piece, like assault is more a violent physical act generally, whereas harassment is more just an unwanted, interaction, aggressive, verbal kind of, abuse and stuff like that. Of course, both of a sexual nature. So I had this one experience where it feels like harassment, where I went to the Air Force Academy, graduated 2013, LeMay, inside joke. So I was I think this was senior year. We have communal showers in the dorms, like male and women, separated, right? But, just taking a shower, doing my thing, like singing probably. I tend to sing in the shower and embarrass myself. And so I ended up getting out of the shower, and I was dancing to the singing. I was like, hey, this is
your own singing.
Yeah, I was like, I'm feeling myself. Okay. This is good. Hell yeah. I was the only one there that day. It was kind of just a chill weekend at the Air Force Academy, and in the fall. And I was like, ooh, yeah, this is just a good vibe. Just hanging out. Bop it down, bam, bam, bam. And it was really weird because I was in that really safe kind of space of just kind of like, feeling myself. And
bathrooms are supposed to be like a safe haven.
Yeah, for sure. And like there was a iPod Nano at the time that was like hidden in the corner, and I was like, that's kind of weird. So of course I stopped dancing and singing at that point. I'm like, that's kind of what's going on. So I walked over to it, and I noticed it was recording like the shower area, and I was like, and immediately was like, what the hell? And in my kind of immediate rage, I deleted what was on it and was like, no, like, I was just being me, and like, I know my singing's not that good anyway, but it was kind of like something intimate was taken from me, like some sort of moment. And so just deleted it in kind of like this immediate rage. And then I was like, that's kind of messed up. And then went along my day. I was like, you know what? Cool, whatever. It's still kind of like, was like kind of weird, kind of up. I think there's this one quote from Trauma Informed Mindfulness, this book that I was reading. It's like, trauma is when you are unable to, it still affects you when you are unable to be able to understand it and like put it into this narrative of your life. Like it's beyond our ability to comprehend still. Like we don't get it and we can't incorporate it into our own life's meaning. And so for me, it was kind of traumatic because I was still kind of like, what? This is, I can't understand. That's just really weird. What's going on? And it's very minor, right? Compared to most people's experiences. But I mentioned it offhand to a buddy of mine, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to share that. And like, it's going to go up to the chain of command and it's going to turn into an investigation. And it did. I was interviewed by basically, they're called OSI, but they're kind of like the FBI or, investigators in the military, and did that whole process. There was no evidence, right? Because I deleted it.
Right.
And I can use that experience. Nothing came of it. It was just kind of like, yeah, we got nothing. So kind of sucks. And
Were you disappointed by that?
A little bit. Like in the moment, I was like, yeah, that's kind of like, why would you do that? Maybe it was just a misinterpretation. Maybe it was just somebody that was, filming himself or something and forgot. But still, I thought that was still kind of weird.
I don't know about forgot.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So a little bit. And I can use that experience now to really relate with those that are going through this process, and use that experience to say, hey, I don't get it, because everybody has their own experience. Everybody has their own trauma. But I was there in that moment with that fit of rage, and like, you took something from me and you don't deserve to get it, and even for a split second, for something as small as like just a video of a bathroom, that's still something I can use to empathize and connect with others.
I want to ask, like, is there part of the whole investigation with Vanessa Guillen was that the culture at Fort Hood it's troublesome. The culture there is troublesome. There's an article that came out where the officers there all were like, hey, I wouldn't, send my kids there. The culture is really bad. What did they actually say? They said, quote, so dangerous that they fear for the safety of their soldiers. Yeah. What do you think about that? Have you seen that in the military?
So it's interesting. I think it's kind of reflective of how we are in our society, like different organizations, different hierarchies, different cultures kind of are created within that environment. Like you have these different experiences that are common and considered normal in different parts of our economy and different groups and different, even like small to big. Like you have different friends where that's considered normal, just making sexual assault jokes and things that's normalized within like maybe locker room type of talk, which is still BS. I get it. And so each base and each like fort, because I'm in the Air Force, all these Army acronyms, like what? But it all has it all has its own culture. And I think it's really unfortunate. I haven't seen it personally. I've seen, in flight school, because I was in pilot training for a bit, and that is still kind of, it's, for anybody that's been related to a flying, like a military flying and like environment, what's weird about it is, just my own personal opinion, is they're holding on to this idea of the past, like this idea of when we were, everything made sense in World War II and, before automation and like all of this technology. And so we're trying to get back to that culture of World War II of like flying and just, like the machismo and the aggression and like just like the violence that was inherent within, this greatest generation. And so, people still have, there's tradition there that means a lot, right? But there's still a lot of cultural tendencies of that old school type of behavior. And so there were like men that were talking about, female students, and these are flight commanders. So what that means is they're in charge of like, so say I'm just like I'm at the bottom. If I'm at the bottom, I'm a student, which is still a lieutenant, still an officer within the structure, but you're a brand new butter bar. You've got like, your lieutenant bars look like butter. They're just,
okay.
And so you're at the bottom of the totem pole, right? And so then up you have, first lieutenants, captains, and this scale of supervision increases at each kind of level. And so for a flight commander, they're generally in charge of, at the time, I think at like maybe 40 to 80 people, and they're a captain. So they already have this power, right? They have this power within the rank. They have this power within their supervisory and role, and kind of authority there. And I remember hearing, this is where I failed because I didn't speak up and say something, but there's a moment where there's a flight commander that was talking about a patch. So all student squadron groups, which are about 30 people going through your flight training together. There's all this, camaraderie and, support. And there's generally women in every class. And for one of them, they had this woman on the patch that they designed for their class patch. It was Miley Cyrus coming in like a wrecking ball.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, this coffee's hitting me a little different. Coming in like a wrecking ball, and this flight commander was saying, "Yeah, this is BS because like on the patch, they had this woman with big breasts, and they were just." Full and, coming in. They don't have anybody in the class like that. They have like a lesbian looking girl and a girl that's just small with tiny tits. I'm like, what? Excuse me? I was a student at the time too. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Whoa. And unfortunately, I didn't say anything.
I mean, you kind of couldn't, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's power there,
right.
Because I was at the bottom of the totem pole. But again, I've always prided myself on standing up to authority, and that was like, I kind of regret not standing up to because that's really unprofessional. Mm-hmm. It was in this bar setting, which also encourages kind of some deviant behavior, I would guess. But
rough talk.
Yeah, rough talk. And it was with a bunch of dudes, so this dude was probably, oh my God, there's so much there. So that's one example of something that I have seen, and that was maybe one of many of the same type of experiences that I've had. And then working as a victim advocate, of course, I've gotten more involved. And I've seen through the eyes of my friends and female coworkers that really this traumatic experiences that they're going through, that kind of all women go through, unfortunately. And it's really, really saddening. To speak to Fort Hood, though, I can totally relate that, I've have a buddy that his wife is in the Army, and their children are coming of age, and one of them wants to join the Army, and he's told me when this was going around, because we were talking about it, and he was like, "There's no way in hell that she's going to be stationed there for those reasons." Like, it has that culture. I think part of the reason is the deployment tempo, that you have all these people that are deploying over and over and over again. So there's like this inherent and latent stress that's being built up in each person, and they're not like releasing that. So that's kind of like creating this tension and violence, structurally and systemically. And then I've just heard leadership issues, and maybe it's partly related to their mission and what they do. I don't know.
Going back to what you're doing right now, if you can share with us here, what kinds of sexual harassment or assault cases do you kind of see generally, without going to specifics, of course?
So I'm still pretty new, so unfortunately I can't give you the best opinion. But the cases I've been involved in, of course, have confidentiality, and I can't go into the details. I would say it really connects with this broader issue within the military, which is why the Vanessa Guillen Act is so important. So within the military, you have everything's under this chain of command, and I don't know the actual stat, but I think I remember seeing that 65% of those that have reported have experienced some sort of retribution for coming forward and trying to give justice to what has happened to them. And so that's problematic. The chain of command is problematic because sometimes commanders have their own investigations, and so they feel warranted in throwing something out. And so it's not an actual official investigation. And in so doing, there's injustice because, there's a lack of real objective transparent justice in action.
What needs to be there to be transparent?
Honestly, the Vanessa Guillen Act is a good start. It removes the chain of command from the investigation and judicial process. So it opens up this new lane where you don't have undue power influence from those in authority. You know, because you have conflicting interests here. On the one hand, you can't really blame commanders in the chain of command for wanting to keep the culture of their organization to be working and to be dynamically still engaged with the mission, like still doing what it's set out to do, right? So they're trying to take care of this organization, in particular the culture, and having this incident come up where it causes a lot of tension and stress on that culture and on that organization, and for people to be now a little bit hesitant to working together, like they want that control, right? The issue is they shouldn't have that control with regard to sexual assault cases. Like there should be independent justice that's ongoing, an independent investigation, because the commander has a foot in the game for minimizing tension within his organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It is conflicting interests.
Yeah, totally.
I was actually doing some research on like women's rights in the military, right? Just like really minimum basic stuff. And women started kind of joining the military during, I want to say like World War II.
In various capacities too. Yeah,
right.
my grandma served.
Oh.
Yeah, she was a lieutenant. She was a nurse.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of women were nurses, but during peacetime, only women nurses were allowed. No other women were allowed to serve in the military. Yeah. That was before like 1948. 1948, the first step for equal membership came into effect. President Truman signed the Women's Armed Service Integration Act.
Hell yeah.
And it let women serve, but they still were restricted in their service. And I don't think women actually realized what the Integration Act how much it restricted their service. Yeah. And only recently women weren't allowed to rise into the chain of command. They, like 20 plus years later is when women's just started to become more than
just nurses. Yeah.
Nurses. Yeah.
What comes to mind for me is the potential of women being limited and restricted for so long, and that we're now kind of harnessing and unlocking this potential for women to really shine and bring forward a lot of great work and, you know, the same qualities we espouse for men historically of like sacrifice, duty, honor country, and all those things. Like women have now been able to, you know, meet and exceed those expectations. And that is amazing. I love it. You know, having women in combat, I think is great. You know, there's been a lot of women in the past too that have disagreed with me, that are like anti-feminist, Phyllis Schlafly, stuff like that. But I think it's great because now we're unlocking really the power and the potential of women in the military. I think it is a rolling kind of growth that needs to happen though, of like checking ourselves of how is it being enacted, and how are we really allowing women to fully be themselves. And what comes to mind is, because I'm an Air Force Academy alumni, you know, women were first accepted in the class of 1980, and women weren't allowed. You know, there was a ramp that said, "Bring me men." You know, bring me men that, I forgot the rest of it. I'm a terrible grad, but bring me men ramp was like one of the areas in the I don't know, it's just well known. So they changed it to integrity first, service for self, and excellence in all we do, which is the 3 core values, which is honestly, in my opinion, more appropriate. But you hear some of these stories, especially from women that are in that class, where on the one hand, right, like at 1948, right, women were coming in, right? In 1976, women were starting to come into the Air Force Academy for both. And for, I would probably wager a bit of money that for every time a woman is placed into like a new frontier of the military, right? I think we just had the first Army Ranger that was a woman recently. And so for combat and special forces and stuff, like they're probably experiencing the same thing where they have to confront all of these barriers within the military culture and probably the military regs and the regulations and rules that adapt to them in their existence just to be there, right? They have to fight for their existence just to be there, and that fight, I don't think men, I don't know if women probably would understand, but because they go through so much, but I don't think men understand really the toll that takes in fighting for your own existence within an organization. And so for this class of 1980, the stories that you'd hear, really horrendous stories, because they were the first class and they're fighting against this traditional culture and society of that manly masculinity, just, like, well, this is a men's institution of like death and violence and killing, and we're going to feminize that. No, not in my Air Force. And it's like, oh, it's so cringe.
That's part of like, they're equaling feminism as being weak. That's definitely, part of the problem. Yeah,
100%. And, I'd love to talk about masculinity sometime as well, because I think that absolutely factors in here of what we really consider.
Next episode.
Next episode. So
here's the thing, though. Like, when I was researching these women's rights in the military, or just like women's history in military, I was just thinking, we have not come anywhere since 1948 when women started serving. Because I was just reading, like, back in 1948, men used to stigmatize women in the service, mocked them all the time, and there were tons of cases of sexual harassment. Same thing right now.
Yeah, I would say I would caveat that a little bit. I would say there's a lot of powerful, like, women and really strong, courageous women since 1948 that have pushed the boundaries and the barriers either away or made it easier for other women. So they've set the example, and they've really exemplified courageous, strong behavior that have made it easier for other women in the future. So they've carried the mantle forward and allowed the women of the future to really, take the mantle further and to really get rid of these other issues that they're facing. So I would say that there's like been a ton of great work by outstanding women. A lot come to mind in terms of, amazing women I've known personally in the military. And then also just the stories that I've heard of women pushing past barriers and making it easier for, later generations of women in the military. But yeah, to come back, like, it's still not ideal. Like, we still have, look at Vanessa Guillen and look at the systemic issues that you see with that case. It's obscene. Like I said earlier, it's like bottom from the top. Like, so this issue with Vanessa Guillen, it involved her supervisor. It involved the supervisor's, like the whole squad or whatever. Like, there was a lot more people involved. And the cover up, I think, extended beyond that. And the fact that there wasn't really a lot of transparency since then. I get that there is, being a victim advocate, I understand that there is a legal process that they follow. It's an active investigation. They're not going to be releasing all details at all the time, but still there was like not enough. And like the senior leadership of the base, I thought, or the fort or whatever, I'm not sure, but I thought they were fired, or there were some sort of ramifications for their like bad behavior. Like, it wasn't enough.
I'm not sure
it could have
either.
been something, but regardless, if there wasn't, the response at all levels throughout this process was not enough. And it went all the way up to the fact that I think like the DOD or the Secretary of Defense had to step in and say something that like, cause it was a huge thing. Like all across, people were talking about it everywhere. People were talking about it in the military. People were talking about it like in my friend groups, on Facebook. It was everywhere, like the hashtags and all that stuff. Like it was a national conversation, and how they handled it at Fort Hood was definitely not up to par. Yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but why do we need to separate military cases, and why does there need to be a separate military investigation when there's military involved? Question one. I guess let's start there.
Start there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a legal scholar or historian, so I can't give you the actual good answer. So I'll give you my own
Maybe we'll
made
have
up
a
answer.
on here soon.
That would be good.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to law school. I guess that's happening, and I'm coming back just for the podcast. Gonna get into debt. You're welcome. The reason I think is related to what I said earlier. My guess would be that the good order and discipline within the military, like commanders have power, within the structure. And if we let the military, like all whims of investigation, not only sexual assault, but like all whims of any sort of criminal or civil investigation or something within the military, then it kind of opens the floodgates to maintaining good order and discipline within a unit, which is charged with, defending our country and fighting battles, which unfortunately have been mainly just imperialist battles. And anyway, that's another side note. But I would say that would be my guess, is that you have this sense of control over this organization. And once you open it up, then it's like you lose that ability to control a fighting force effectively. But with that being said, like the Vanessa Guillen Act really gets around that, I think, and like creates this really a good avenue, making, I think, sexual assault like a UCMJ charge, making, I think, putting the offenders on the, I think it's like a catch an offender program. It's like the catch program. It's basically like to catch serial offenders. So for those that are like in the system already, and they identify this alleged perpetrator for one case, and like, hey, there's a trend here. Like it fills a database so that you can catch people that are like multiple repeat offenders. So I think that, to answer your question,
yeah. I guess that's kind of my only question. I just feel like there's so much secrecy when it's
unneeded. It does its own
tough
thing.
To understand. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's internal investigations that go on. There's an independent investigation if like cops get involved within like local area. So it's separate, but still ongoing. So I think it all comes back down to that control. I would say what's interesting too, if you take a step back and talk about it like theoretically, really it's still about controlling women. Like if you think about it, like the idea that this commander still has the power and authority over justice for women, instead of justice happening like of its own accord. And so I find it interesting.
So interesting. Yeah.
That it's still related to control, that idea that women need to be controlled. And that's kind of like the tendency. You relate all sexual assault really has that same theme, is control over women, control over their bodies, control over what they should say, what they shouldn't say, and creating this kind of abstract objectification of a woman. And that abstract objectification needs to be, within this box that fragile men need, women to, reside in. And you can say that systemically, that you have all these issues and justice needs to happen. Okay, well, then let justice happen, instead of wanting to control and micromanage, the sexual assault cases and how women come forward and really what's allowed. And it's insane. Yeah.
So what does Jeff Wagner, what do you want to accomplish?
I think there's like an insane, misinterpretation of like what sexual assault is. Like there's a lot of like right-wing conservative types of men that are just fragile, that are saying, well, I heard a story where, somebody made it up, a bunch of false rape allegations. When if you look at the data, it's only like 2%. 2% of cases are false, or some sort of
very
fake.
low.
Exactly.
Lower than I thought.
Yeah, 2%. And so like Yeah. To answer your question, like, what do I want systemically is like, it just comes down to wanting a safe and justice-driven system that we enact that would create a safe and justice-driven culture that we can reinforce and see the results of when we see like so many people getting off because they, not having, any punishments because they, didn't meet some sort of arbitrary legal standard, or the commander threw it out, or whatever reason you want to give. And he just keeps, or she keeps like having this behavior and like assaulting men and women. Like that's not something that's going to create a positive change in our culture. So kind of a long answer, but I think those systemic changes will create like more later cultural stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing
for sure
your opinions and your experiences.
Yeah.
Before we go, I just want to ask, what are your current barriers, Jeff? Right now, either in life in general or in the last 24 hours?
That's a good question. Honestly, my own singing voice really is like bothering me. I need to take singing lessons. It's so bad. Aside from that, I would say relate it back to this conversation, because there's a lot of like personal barriers, of course, that I, like genetics and dating failures and hating, the app culture and all that stuff. Yeah, that is definitely a barrier for me. And then also still being in the military, like, I'm like wanting to get out in terms of helping people with social work. So that's kind of a barrier in a way. Related to this conversation though is like other men and masculinity. Toxic masculinity gets thrown around, I think, so much that it's kind of like this joke. It's kind of meaningless. But I do think that there's something there to that the idea that men can't be themselves, that they have to be this like false, but like, really masculine, strong, doesn't cry, like.
I love when guys cry.
Yeah. I'm crying right now. Like, just the idea that you have to be a certain way in this box. Like we talked about, like men objectifying women and putting them in these boxes and like trying to control that. Like, I think that is largely due to the fact that men do it to themselves. Like that there is this box of manly behavior of what really is considered acceptable. Talk about yoga. Yoga is one of those. I have a really great face skincare routine.
I love that.
Mario Bandescu, they has really great face creams. They have that seaweed night cream, is amazing. Really recommend it.
I actually haven't tried that one.
Yeah, you really have to.
Right.
Something like that, right, is considered effeminate. Even just men wearing dresses, like Harry Styles came out on Vogue with like that dress, and it like Ben Shapiro like crapped himself, and like Candace Owens and all these like right-wing figures were like, men are being destroyed by American culture, and you're like, what? Like, are we gonna forget that like Romans had like flowing robes, and that like King Louis the 14th or 16th or whatever was dressing in like, he had like buckles on his like,
so did
on
American
his heels. Yeah, like it's insane. It's so arbitrary. Like
pilgrims.
Yeah, I think so. That's frustrating, is that we get put in this box of like what we're allowed to do, and that, I think for me, it's personally affected me, because like other men are like, call me gay, or use pejoratives that like, I'm effeminate because I do yoga or, face care or, get,
bring them to me. I'll punch them in the face.
Do mani-pedis. Mani-pedis are amazing. They're so good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, the other day I went to the nail salon, and I think he was a military vet or something. Yeah. He was a lot older, and he was getting his toes done. I was so excited.
Yeah. Hell yeah. So I need to, maybe if I get more tattoos and more traditional masculine stuff, and then also keep doing what I do, just to kind of like break the barrier a little bit more. But I would say that's absolutely the biggest barrier. So it personally affected me because of what's considered acceptable with my friend group. You know, the hypersexualization too comes into play, that in this box that we're in, we have to be hypersexual. We always should want sex. Everything should be sex driven. You know, I was hanging out with a good buddy, and he couldn't stop talking about women that were around us, like sexually. Like, and I'm like, dude, we're eating sushi, like in a park. Like, can we just relax, bro? Like, can we just enjoy
I have
sushi
so much to say on this topic, but we'll have to continue that in the next episode.
Yeah, again. Yeah. So that's a barrier I'm currently trying to overcome, is that masculinity component to, I think, a proper feminist equality that really exists. I think masculinity is definitely going to be a part of that. So, yeah.
I support you.
Thanks.
And whatever you do. So, Jeff, where can people find you?
I am on Instagram as wondering.wagner. I also
Wandering,
have
that's with an A, not O. Wandering.
Yeah, I'm an A. Not the O. Those O's, man, they're really embarrassing. I'm also on YouTube. I have
yes, plug yourself.
Yes, coin. I got a music channel, Gold Cassette. So
yes.
Gold Cassette Sewer Life is one song I'd recommend. It's not very good music. Sewer Life.
Oh,
yeah. I sampled Garbage Trucks actually for it, so that's good.
That's amazing.
And that's basically it. Oh, I got Frey Art on Facebook, so FREY-art.
He makes a lot of good art. We're in his room right now, and there's all of his paintings on as well, and it's very colorful.
It's something. Trying to sell them too, so please, if you're interested, PM me, let me know.
Snaps for you.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Jeff, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, please. 5 stars. 5 stars, please. Jeff.
5 stars. 10 stars.
What are you going to rate this podcast?
Oh, you already know. I'm going to come in 5 stars and then rate it 1 star just so I can change it back to 5 stars again.
Oh. Yeah. Does that do anything?
It's like 11 stars.
Amazing. Thank you. Again, rate it, review it. Love you guys.